So I wanted to do a little bit of a recap on the case of Charlotte Kinsey and Cinda Pallet. I'm going to segue into another story about another young girl who went missing from a state fair. I don't think that this Charlotte and Cinda's cases are related to this case. But what I'm talking about here in these stories is the way that these young girls, these young women, went missing. Some of them were found murdered, some of them were never found, and they just went missing from these fires. And while one story may not have anything to do with the other, it's kind of just a theme. I was a teenager and went to a lot of these little local fairs and carnivals and things that would go on. And when you're that young, before the creation of the internet, before, we were constantly bombarded with TV shows about missing persons and murder and stuff like that, I think people had less fear. And I'm not saying that these girls are in any way to blame for their disappearances or anything like that, but I just think that they were more trusting. They didn't know to be afraid. They didn't have fear because they had never heard about stuff like this happening. It was before GPS, before cell phone service could locate and track people quickly. The last two videos that I have done have been based on the first one was Devil Dog Doe in Arizona, and that led me to talk about Valentine Sally, who was another Jane Doe who was found in the early 1980s and was later identified as Carolyn Eaton from Missouri. And the reason that I lumped those together was simply because the bodies were located very close proximity to each other, even though this happened many years apart. But once I got started reading about Carolyn Eaton and who people and police suspected could have been her killer, it led me to these other cases of Sharon Bald Eagle and Cinda and Charlotte. And I want to read a little bit more today about another girl. Well, I want to read a little bit more about Charlotte and Cinda first. So now the story picks up back at the fairgrounds in 1981. Friends Charlotte Kinsey and Cinda Pallet were very excited. This was the first time their parents had allowed them to attend the fair by themselves. Cinda's brother Tony dropped them off at the fair around noon that day, and they were told to call their mothers at 5:30, and they did. They were excited. They said a carnival worker had offered them a job helping him unload stuffed animals from a truck. They asked for permission, and their parents agreed, thinking it was harmless enough. They were inside this fairground, so what could possibly happen to them? The girls were told to call back home again at 9 p.m. and arranged the ride home. At about 7 p.m., two boys who knew Charlotte and Cinda said that they talked to the girls. They saw them and spoke with them at about 7 p.m. And the man who they were supposedly working for, unloading these stuffed animals, approached the children and said, I have these jobs. Would you all be interested? They described the man as being 6'2", white, about 50 years of age, saying that he wore wire-rimmed glasses. He had a black and gray full beard and mustache. He was wearing a brown striped cowboy shirt and a flimsy cowboy hat and a belt with the name Joseph engraved on it. They said the man drove a 1980 or 81 tan Pontiac Grand Prix with South Dakota license plates. Now, he had instructed Cinda and Charlotte to wait for him at a nearby ballpark. He put the boys in the car, and they drove, and he picked up the two girls. They all got into the car, and they drove to a nearby store, and he took the two girls with him. So he gave them $10 and told them to wait at the truck in case the man showed up. He then drove away with the girls in the car. The boys thought this was a little bit suspicious, and they called home and they told them, and the parents told them this, they shouldn't have went with this man, and they were going to call the police because they waited around there for a very long time and the man never returned with these girls. So they called home. Now, Cinda and Charlotte's parents were already getting worried because they were told to call home at exactly 9 p.m. and we will come and pick you up. So they call these boys call their parents and they say, here's what happened. They call the police. The police start an investigation. They find out that this man was not an employee of the fire. No one there knew him. He didn't work for any of the carnival workers who were contracted. None of the fire workers knew him, and the man was wearing a yellow badge saying this was his ID for his, job. And they said, we don't hand those out to our employees, So here we go with the police. I want to say this real quick. I try not to be too critical of the police in these stories that I do, because sometimes I read about cases where the police really put in the work, and other times they really don't. But it never fails that they almost always assume that teenagers are runaways. And the parents said this was not the case. These girls absolutely would always call home when they were told to. This is the reason why their parents trusted them to allow them to go to this carnival that night by themselves. They did come up with a suspect, and the man's name was Don Corey. He was a 36-year-old man who was described as a drifter, and he worked at local carnivals and fairs around the South and Midwest. He did have a criminal record involving juveniles and drugs. Now, they said that this man, some of the kids that were at the fair that night said that they remembered seeing this Corey and that he came up and talked to them. Authorities finally caught up with him in Greenville, Alabama on October the 9th. He was driving a station wagon, which was not the same vehicle that the boys described to the police. So they were able to confirm that he had been in Dallas, Texas on the night that the girls went missing. So this theory falls apart. They continue investigating and searching for the girls, and they eventually were able to get this description of this car, and they were able to trace it back as a rental car. And the rental car company told them that the man's name was Royal Russell Long. Long, when he was questioned, would admit that he was in Oklahoma City the day before the girls disappeared, and he was actually at the state fair on the day that they disappeared. But he denied having anything to do with their disappearance. Another thing that pointed to him was that he was nearly identical to the composite sketch that the police had drawn of the description of the man these two boys gave. And his ex-wife saw this sketch on some posters, and she called the police. And she said, that is absolutely him. I know him. That's him. On May 29th, 1985, he was officially charged with the kidnapping and murder. Now, this was 4 years later, and he was already in prison at this point for Sharon Bald Eagle and kidnapping her and Sandy Broken Leg in Wyoming. He was extradited to Oklahoma to stand trial for the kidnapping and murder of Cinda and Charlotte. The car that Long had rented matched the one described by the boys. They found hairs in the trunk that matched Cinda. They also found hairs in his home that matched Cinda. They used luminol in the trunk of the car, and it showed the definite presence of blood. After months of hard work and preparing for what they thought was a strong case, the outcome of the trial was shocking. A judge would dismiss the charges against Long, saying that there was insufficient evidence to prove that he was responsible. According to an attorney on the prosecution's side, he recalled that Royal Russell Long walked towards the two girls' parents and said in a whispered voice, "Only I know where they are now." The prosecution and the girls' families were devastated. Since the judge had dismissed the charge, Long would never be retried for the murder of these girls. The only thing that they were able to take away was that he would be going back to prison to serve the rest of his 2 life sentences for Sharon and Sandy. Now, Sandy Broken Leg. I didn't find out a whole lot about her in the previous video, but I want to tell a little bit about her story here. She was 16 and Sharon Bald Eagle was 12, and they were both hitchhiking on a Wyoming highway when Long picked them up. This would have been September 19th, 1984. He told them he was going to go get some food and wanted to know if they wanted some food and to come back to his house where they could clean up and eat. She said when he got there, they offered them $100 to have sex with him. She told him she was not that kind of girl, and then he pulled a gun out on her. She said he then beat her friend and tied both of them up and raped her. She escaped while he was asleep, and she went to a neighbor's house for help. She said soon after she escaped and went to this neighbor's house, she heard his pickup truck drive away. By the time police got there, he was already gone and had taken Sharon with him. Now, as this writer, I'm reading this from this writer's perspective. And as far as my thoughts on this case, there is probably nothing that will surprise you. First off, Charlotte Kinsey and Cinda Pallet was a heartbreaking case. In the last phone call to their mother, the girls were so excited that this man had offered them a job working at this carnival and earning extra money. They were so excited and happy about this that they called home and told their parents. He was sitting in court being tried for these girls' disappearances, their murders. And some judge says, nah, I don't believe the testimony of the daughter. And so therefore, if Russell Long had not already been convicted, the rape, the kidnapping of these two girls, this judge would have set him free, and he would have been back out on the streets picking up more young girls and possibly raping and murdering them. Now, this was all in 1985, and he died 8 years later at the age of 58 from a heart attack in prison. And sadly, all these years later, Cinda and Charlotte have never been found, and neither has Sharon Bald Eagle. Before I move on into the next part of this story, I would just like to remind everybody, if you haven't already, to please like the video and subscribe to the channel. And so the one that I'm going to talk about in this part of the story is Misty Copsey. This was September of 1992. At 3:30 p.m., Diana Copsey dropped off her 14-year-old daughter, Misty, and her friend, Trina Brevard. Now, this would have been what is now the Washington State Fair. The girls promised they would find their own way home. Misty had planned to take the 8:40 p.m. Pierce Transit bus that would have taken her back to her own neighborhood of Spanaway. This was the first time that her mother had given her this freedom to be able to go out on her own and make her own way back home. And she told her, she said, if you do it wrong this time, I'm not going to let you do this again, meaning I'm not going to give you the freedom to find your own way back home. Shortly after 8 p.m., Diana received a phone call from her daughter saying that she had missed the bus. Misty told her mother that she wanted to call her 18-year-old friend Reuben Schmidt, and he had a car and she was going to call and ask him for a ride. Her mother said, "No, I don't like that kid. Call someone else and then call me back." Misty promised she would call her mother back, but she didn't. Now, Diana, the mother, was at work that night. She worked overnight as a caregiver. When she hadn't heard from her daughter, when she went home that next morning and her daughter was not at home, she immediately called 911. And from the beginning, the police seemed to just write this off as a runaway. And the more you read about stories that took place in the 80s, 90s, you don't get as much compassion from the police. You don't see them taking some of these claims seriously. Now, in today's world, parents have access to their kids because of social media, because everybody has a phone. They can put trackers on their children's phones, or they're on joint accounts where they can trace the phone. And teenagers almost always have their phones. But at that time in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s, that wasn't available to parents. So she was worried. She hadn't heard from her daughter. So Diana called this Reuben, and he said, yes, Misty did call him, but he told her that he didn't have enough gas to make that trip to go pick her up, drive her home, and then get back home himself. So he told her he just couldn't come and pick her up. She also talked to Trina, who was with Misty that night. Trina said that Misty was waiting for the bus, and she decided to walk home. Diana then decided to call Reuben back. He wasn't at home, but his roommate, James Tinsley, answered the phone. She asked Tinsley if Reuben had been at home all night, and the answer surprised the mother. He said no, him and his uncle left to go get Misty. Diana then called a third time looking for Reuben, and this time he answered the phone. He told her that his roommate had been wrong. He had gone to a party that night, and he didn't pick up Misty. He didn't know where she was. Trina said that when she left Misty at the bus stop, a bus driver came forward and said that he spoke to Misty around 9:20 p.m. Misty asked him when was the last bus for Spanaway. Before the driver could find out the information, she walked off into the night distressed. That was apparently the last time Misty was ever seen. 5 months after Misty's disappearance, Diana Copsey and her friends were out searching when they found a pair of blue jeans in a muddy ditch. Diana was absolutely positive that these were her daughter's blue jeans. Part of the reason she was so certain is that they were actually her jeans, and Misty had borrowed them to wear to the fair that night. Inside one of the paint sligs was a sock and a pair of underwear. King County Police collected the items for testing. This would seem to bring law enforcement into the case more, since the jeans possibly held the story of what could have happened to her. She was at this bus stop. She missed the 8:40 bus, but they know that the bus driver says he spoke to her. Now, 5 months passed before police went out and interviewed any of these people. They were just telling this mom how your daughter just ran off. She just up and, took off down the road somewhere. 5 months after the disappearance, police finally interviewed Trina, who was with her that night. She told police that Misty did call Reuben for a ride, and Reuben did tell her that he didn't have enough gas. Now, the friend is telling the police this. Why did the police wait so long to interview this girl? She said that while Misty was on the phone with Reuben, She told him how to get to her house and how to get into her house. She says she had some money in her bedroom and he could have the money if he would go get the money, buy the gas, and come pick her up. He still refused, according to Trina. Now, the police finally went out to interview Reuben. Reuben he evaded the police at first, but eventually he agreed to talk to them. He said that Misty called him twice that night. The first time he told her he had no gas. He told police that he suffered a blackout and couldn't remember anything after Misty's call. He also told them the next day that he drove to his grandmother's farm, but he couldn't remember why. Did he call his uncle and say, hey, this girl needs a ride home. Can you come pick me up? We'll go get the money. We'll give her a ride home. And why did he suffer a blackout? Why did he tell his roommate? He told his roommate that him and his uncle were going to go get the girl. And yet he told her mother that he went to a party that night. He says he can't remember anything after Misty's second phone call. Police would then interview 15-year-old James Tinsley, who was staying with Reuben. His accounts of that night would differ quite a bit from Reuben's. Tinsley said that when Misty called Reuben, he had his 13-year-old girlfriend with him. Now keep in mind, Reuben was 18. Tinsley said Reuben seemed like he wanted to go pick Misty up, but his girlfriend didn't want him to go. The girlfriend got mad and left the house. And after she did, Reuben left too. Tinsley said that this was weird because he would usually tell him where he was going, and usually Tinsley would go with him if he was going somewhere. But he didn't say anything about where he was going. He arrived back at the house late that night. Tinsley said he was asleep, and he never spoke to him about where he had gone that night. Because now keep in mind, he had told her mother on the phone that him and his uncle were going to go pick up Misty. Yet he's telling the police, he didn't tell me where he was going. He just got up and walked out the door. And by the time he came back home that night, I was in bed, and he never mentioned where he had been. Trina Brevard seemed to change her story from that night. Instead of walking home while Misty waited at the bus stop, she told a friend that she had a 23-year-old boyfriend named Michael Reiner. So she tells her friend she lied to the police because she didn't want to get into trouble if people found out that she was with this 23-year-old boyfriend. She says that he came and picked her up that night and drove her home. Now, when police found out this new information, they began to watch this Michael Reiner. Now, he had this 1981 Ford Escort, and he had put it up for sale right after this. And when they found out this story about he had picked this 15-year-old girl up that night, they bought the car. He had put it up for sale, and they secretly bought it. And they tested it for evidence, and they could find no evidence of any blood or anything that might have happened inside the car. They tried to track down the car Reuben owned at the time, but they found out that it had been destroyed at the wrecking yard. Considering where the blue jeans were found, Diana Copsey was positive that they were her daughters. This area was reportedly not far from where the remains of two girls had disappeared a few years earlier. Kimberly DeLange disappeared in July of 1988. Her remains were found the following month. Anna Chebetnoy, I hope I'm saying her name right, Anna Chebetnoy, went missing in August of 1990, and her remains would be found a year later With two victims and the possible clothes of another girl being found so close to each other, they began to wonder if they had a serial killer in the area. The police were still not positive that Misty had not run away. They still had to consider that as a possibility. But with the bus driver saying that she was so distraught and upset that she had missed the bus, and by her making 2 phone calls to Reuben asking him for a ride home, I don't think she was running away. I think she was desperately trying to get home. She was probably, at the age of 14, she was probably very distraught and could possibly have taken a ride from anybody at that point. But after they found the jeans, police began to lean towards foul play. Now, there was a rift between the police and Diana Copsey, the mother. She said this rift would never heal. She was bitter that they had considered Misty a runaway and hadn't even gone out to interview anybody. In the early hours and days after her daughter disappeared, she believes had they gone out and searched and talked to people and searched cars and searched property, they might have found something that would have led them to some answers about her daughter's disappearance. Now, even though Diana insisted from the beginning that the blue jeans that they found were hers, and they were the jeans that her daughter was wearing that night, no kinds of forensic testing could ever lead them back to Misty. And some people in the police department even hinted that they believed the mother and some of her friends who were helping her search had planted the jeans in order to get the police to take this more seriously. Because it's almost like the police are saying, well, we didn't really want to investigate, so she was kind of forcing our hand. Sadly, Diana passed away in February of 2020 after spending 28 years of her life trying to find her daughter and trying to find justice for her daughter. Now that she was gone, Misty's half-brother, that she had never even got to meet, Colton Smith, has now taken up the case. He wants answers as to what happened to his sister that he never got to know. He also wants the police to finally take some seriousness into this case and find the people who are responsible for this girl's disappearance. She was a vulnerable young girl alone in the dark for the first time on her own. Anyone could have picked her up. It could have been the unknown killer of Kimberly DeLange and Anna Chebetnoy. Their bodies were found close to where Misty's jeans were found. This writer says, I don't discount that Reuben Schmidt was a suspect. Misty knew him. She called him twice. She definitely would have gotten into the car with him if he came to pick her up. Now, Reuben's story is that he told her no, that he couldn't come pick her up, but then his roommate leaves shortly after this and is gone for an extended period of time. His roommate, this 15-year-old boy that was living with him, could both of them have left and went and picked her up? Could both of them be covering for each other or kind of trying to place the blame on each other? Could he have called up his uncle? Did the uncle live at the grandmother's farm? Did he say, hey, Unc, come pick me up. I got to go pick this girl up. And the uncle said, okay, I'll be there in a few minutes. They go pick her up, take her back out to the farm. Was the farm ever searched? After I started doing some research on her, and anybody who follows true crime, missing persons cases has probably heard of Misty Copsey. Maybe you haven't heard of her as much as you might have heard of JonBenet Ramsey or Natalie Holloway or Elizabeth Smart. And the difference is the police did not take this as a serious abduction, kidnapping. They kind of blew it off as just this girl ran away from home because she wasn't happy in her home life. So I wanted to talk a little bit about her home life and about some information that I found out about some of the people in her life. Now, one of the reasons I believe, and other people believe, that the police kind of just pushed this case to the side was that her mother had a history with the police. She'd had a history of some alcohol abuse and had been arrested for DUI, and she had had a conviction for welfare fraud. They didn't live in a big, nice brick home in the suburbs. They lived in a trailer park, and the police probably just saw this girl. There's no mention anywhere in any of the stories that I've been able to find about her father. It just says that her mother had other children at home, and the police just kind of thought this girl just wanted to go off and live her life and enjoy, her freedom. They spoke to, after, once they did decide to start investigating a little bit, about 5 months into this disappearance, they went to her school and they spoke to a couple of girls who claimed to have seen and spoken to Misty that night at the fair. And they said she didn't, she wasn't abducted, she was fine. Well, it was later revealed that these two girls were not friends of Misty's, and the people that knew her said these girls didn't know Misty. They wouldn't have come up and spoken to her. They were not the kind of friends, people that would have been friends with her. Even though her mother reported her missing the very morning that she couldn't find her, police didn't enter it as a missing person for a week because they were trying to figure out which jurisdiction would it have been. So let's get back to Trina, her friend that was with her that night. Trina told investigators that this 23-year-old man, Michael Reiner, had come to pick her up and that he offered to take Misty home as well. But Misty didn't like him and wouldn't get in the car. She said she told her mother she was going to take the bus, and that's what she decided to do. Now, the reason that police were investigating this Michael Reiner was because even though he didn't have a criminal record as an adult, but when he was 16, he had been charged with the kidnapping and rape of an 11-year-old girl. And so they were investigating him. They thought, he has this history with these young girls, and here he is, 23 years old, dating a 14-year-old girl. And so they couldn't find anything to associate him with Misty, so they moved on from that. Now, Reuben was the one who Misty called twice that night. She offered for him to go to her house and get some money from her bedroom for guys to come pick her up. Personally, I believe this is what happened. Whether he went to her house that night to get this money, whether he borrowed some money, or whether he really had the guys to begin with and just told her that because his 13-year-old girlfriend was there and he didn't want her to know that he was actually going to go pick Misty up. Now, he told investigators that he was prone to blackouts, and he said that he had blacked out that night and he couldn't remember anything between the time Misty called him and he woke up at his grandmother's farm. Misty's mom told investigators that Schmidt had this obsession, and other people said this as well, that this Reuben Schmidt had this obsession with Misty, and that he had dated, that he had known her since she was a little younger girl, and they had lived in the same trailer park. And the mom says he was always interested in younger girls. And keep in mind, he was dating a 13-year-old the night that Misty calls wanting to ride home. Misty was only a year older at 14. Now, this 18-year-old Reuben took a polygraph, but it was inconclusive, and police believe that he was attempting to mess up the test results. Misty's mom told police that she had overheard Reuben and her daughter on the phone talking, and that Reuben told Misty that she made him horny. And her mother was really upset about this. She said, this is a little girl. At the time she was around 13. She didn't want her daughter to have anything to do with Reuben. So that's the reason why the night that she asked her mom, could she call Reuben for a ride? Her mom said no, but she did anyway. And I believe personally that this is probably what led to her demise. I don't believe that she was the victim of Gary Ridgway. I don't believe she was the victim of any other serial killer, but I could be wrong. Misty's case slowed to a crawl as law enforcement struggled to put together what could have happened to her. Now, before I get into this other man who entered the picture and became friends with the mom and became a person to help the mom investigate, I'm going to talk a little bit more about Reuben. Now, the police didn't put much of an effort into the investigation of Reuben. They said that he was temperamental and prone to violent rages. It's possible, I think, that he went and picked her up. He tried to attempt to have sex with her, and she probably pushed him away, and they got into this argument. And I think, I'm just talking, this is just my own thoughts, and took her out there somewhere close to his grandmother's farm and disposed of her. Now, Schmidt told someone years later, now, he was accused in 1996 of rape by a friend of his, a female friend of his. And in 2006, he was married, and his wife filed a restraining order against him after he threatened to burn down their house. But now, a few years after Misty's disappearance, he told a friend that he worked with that he knew where Misty's body was at. So we go on to Gary Ridgway. He wasn't really a suspect. He was known to pick up women on the streets in the area where Misty would have disappeared. It's a possibility, but I don't think police ever really put much into that. And then there was a man named Robert Hickey. Now, Robert Hickey he had picked up and raped and kidnapped a 15-year-old girl in 1993, not long after Misty vanished. After he was released from prison, he attempted to rape another young woman and was sentenced to life without parole. Now, during the time of Misty's disappearance, Robert drove a red Camaro, and there were 3 paint chips discovered on the blue jeans that were found that were believed to have been Misty's blue jeans. They found 3 red paint chips, but police did not preserve that, and those were lost, and they don't know if that could have been paint chips from that car. So the police really even deny that the paints were Misty's. They believe that they were planted, and then you got to get into this whole hi-ho killer who is believed to have been responsible for the murders of Kimberly DeLange and Anna Chebetnoy, who were found very close to the location where Misty's jeans were believed to have been found. So police just had this whole group of people who were given differing stories, and the police themselves were really not putting in a whole lot of effort. It was almost like they were being forced to have to go out and do their job, and they really just did the bare minimum with Misty's case. Maybe cold case detectives now can work on these stories and piece together something, but there's so much more layers to this. Reuben Schmidt, and how he had later in life told people in his life that he knew where her body was. He told them that her body was buried only about 6 miles away from where the blue jeans were found, and that was around the place where his grandmother's farm was. I asked the question once again about his uncle. Did he have help disposing of her body? And what about the roommate? I don't know that they've ever gone out and searched this farm or the area near this farm or anything of, near there. So sadly, to wrap this story up, Misty Copsey was never found. Her mother passed without ever, getting any kind of closure or answers into what happened to her 14-year-old daughter. This is sadly one of those cases where police dropped the ball. They really just saw this girl and just said, she's ran off. She went to the fair that night, and I guess they were trying to assume that she ran off with somebody she met at this carnival or fair. They never really even looked into that. So this mother spent 28 years of her life searching for this young girl, never really getting any answers. And we may never get answers to any of these cases, but I just wanted to share these stories. I personally don't believe that Misty's case was in any way related to the carnival, the fair that she went to that night. I mean, it's possible that she could have been followed, but I don't believe that. Hopefully, in time, cold case detectives and people doing research, genealogy, maybe we'll be able to find something. There's never been any remains of Misty found other than these blue jeans, which police disputed were hers, and the paint chips that were found that some people believe may have come from this car of this Robert Hickey, that he drove this red Camaro at the time that Misty went missing. And I don't know if they'll ever be able to find anything, forensics or anything, to link anybody to her case without her remains. But I'm going to come back and do some updates and some stories about this friend of her mother's who got involved with this search, and how police believe that he was helping the mom to plant evidence, and just some things about him. They said that he was obsessed with this Gary Ridgway and put himself in the middle of these investigations. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the other two girls who went missing in that same area, and who were found in the same area where Misty's jeans were believed to have been found. And I'll come back and do a follow-up on that. Thanks for watching.